To bring you this program today, we've partnered with Cherokee Choices, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians Food Distribution Program, Empowering Mountain Foods, Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians Public Health, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and Sun Life. It takes a lot of people to bring you this program, and I really think you're going to enjoy it. It's really fantastic. So let's get started. Today's program is called The History of Native Food and Foodways, and it's being presented by our program creator, the amazing Lois Ellen Frank. Lois is Gaiwa native based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She's made a career of bringing health to Native Americans through traditional nutritious foods. She's a Native foods historian, a culinary anthropologist, an educator, a James Beard award-winning cookbook author, and a chef with a catering company specializing in revitalization of ancestral Native American cuisine. Pretty amazing. She's also an adjunct professor at the Institute of American Indian Arts, as well as teaching food sovereignty and healthy lifestyles with various tribes and states. Enjoy her talk today. And I think you'll understand more clearly why a Cherokee Foods demonstration farm at Noquishe is so important. Lois is assisted in all 5 of these webinars by Carolyn Trapp, who's with Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And she can answer questions specific to diabetes and she knows a lot about healthy foods and can help with that too. So take it away, Lois.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to pull up this PowerPoint. And I just want to say, my name is Lois Ellen Frank. It's an honor to be here. I'm from the Kiowa Nation on my mom's side. I'm Sephardic on my dad's side. And I've spent the majority of my life researching Native American foods and the history of these foods. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the history of Native American cuisine and what that means. And it's going to mean something different to each of us and all of our tribes regionally in our communities. I'm going to show you some success stories and things here in the Southwest, and then encourage all of you to document your own foods and revitalize and reinvigorate these. Part 2 is going to be connection to culture. So we're going to focus part 2 on gardens and gardening and ceremony and the earth and what that does to us as Native people. And then part 3 is going to be an optional cook along. We're going to do a healthy and easy to prepare Native American menu, including wild greens and salad, sauteed greens. I'm going to teach you guys how to make blue corn tortillas, and we're going to do a sweet corn yellow soup. So in order to understand Native American cuisine and the history of the cuisine, I call this going back to the future. We have to go back to the past and see what happened in order to move forward into the future. So when we understand what were our ancestral foods, how did our ancestors find them, what were included in our gardens, and this is a beautiful aerial view of the Cherokee Youth Garden in North Carolina. And this was part of a project done with the American Indian Institute for Healthy Roots from Traditional Foods in Native America Part 3. So I use this in my teaching, my curriculum at the Institute of American Indian Arts. So food, number 1, is more than just something to eat. And some of you may know some of these concepts. This may be new to you. So if you know it already, just look at it as a review. But food is definitely our medicine and always has been our medicine. Food is our sovereign right. And food is actually the key to our health and wellness. And so it's much more than something, just something to eat. Now, Native American cuisine is broken down through my research into 4 distinct historic periods. the pre-contact period, the first contact period, the government issue period, and the new Native American cuisine. And I'm going to show you another slide. So the pre-contact period goes back from as far back as 10,000 years up until that 1492 first contact with Europeans. And then what we want to learn is what were those cultivated and wild plants and animals that we ate, each of us in our own communities. The second period is the first European contact. So foods that may have been introduced, maybe that have been woven in and are inseparable with a specific community's identity. I think a really good example would be sheep to the Dene or Navajo people. And that starts from 1492 to the 1800s, wheat. And we're going to take a look at this. We're going to go through this visual history. And then the government issue period, beginning in the 1800s. And this is the relocation. This is the most traumatic. This is the most historical trauma for all of us as Native people. And what happened during that period? Where did we deviate? What foods were introduced? And then, of course, the new Native. And this is where we are now. And this is exciting. We see lots of communities revitalizing, reinvigorating foods. And so the new Native is actually each community deciding what do they want to serve to their community members from these three periods. Some communities are not doing the government issue, but some are. So let's look at the pre-contact period. What was involved in this period and what are some of the foods that we ate? And my students love to compile lists. So we have domesticated crops all throughout the Americas. We have wild foods, and these would include anything from wild carrots or celery to ramps, onions, garlic, turnip, salad greens, spinach, lots of wild foods. Fruits, all kinds of fruits, including wild berries and currants and cherries. And then further south, avocados, bananas, coconuts, etc. Grains and rice, there's wild rice, there's seeds, there's nuts, there's acorns, black walnuts, and then some of the different wild animals would have been bison, elk, venison, turkey, quail, rabbit, robin, all kinds of fish, all kinds of shellfish, and many more. Again, depending on where your indigenous community is based. And then lots of medicinal plants that we still use, not only in food, but for health and wellness. So lots of pre-contact foods. This is a little map. This was done by Renewing America's Food Traditions, actually by Gary Nabhan. And it's not a perfect map, but it does show some of the dominant foods. You can see on the east, we have corn, we have seafood, we have some maple syrup. Then you look at the wild rice, the bison, which would be the plains, chili, pine nut, acorn, and then in that northwest coast, salmon, and further into Canada, moose. So it's just to show you that many of our indigenous foods are regional or place-based, right? They come from a specific region. These are 8 foods that Native people gave to the world: corn, beans, squash, chili, tomato, potato, vanilla, and cacao. And what I mean by that is that these foods did not exist anywhere in the world outside of the Americas. And probably the most prominent and the most important to many, many, many tribes are the Three Sisters. And that would include corn and beans and squash. What's fascinating about these three is it's not only the nutrients that they provide, but it's how they grow. And there's an interconnectedness. And many Native people talk about these being as gifts from the Great Spirit for us and to feed us as Native people. So corn goes back about 9,500 years. Wow. And it's now one of the most important crops and grains in the world. So Here's a poster of Indian corn, um, and some of the beautiful indigenous corn that Native people have grown. There were hundreds and hundreds of corns when Europeans first landed here, and corn, of course, has spread all over the world, making its impact not only with Native people, but all over the world. And so corn has many layers of meaning. Corn is a gift, corn is ceremony, corn is storyteller, corn is song, prayer, maiden, mother, sister, healer, medicine, sustenance, food, cuisine, art, and especially for many of us tribes, corn is the essence of life. And so corn is actually a perennial. It's dependent on man to cultivate. It is indigenous to the Americas, and it is considered to be a gift from the Creator by many tribes. So corn, very important. And here's a picture actually of Chef Walter's daughter. This is Calandra. And corn is not only going to be an important part of her life, but it's part of her coming of age ceremony as she transitions from girl to woman in Kinalda, the coming of age ceremony in her tribe, Navajo puberty ceremony. And this is a picture of Tiffany Morgan, and she's making an offering with corn to her grandfather's garden. And in that garden, they're going to grow corn, squash, sunflowers, tomatoes, and they're going to be using a dry farming method. So that's a method of farming without irrigation. Beans are, oh, if you're not eating beans, guys, you need to incorporate beans into your diet. Beans are extremely high in protein, an excellent source of fiber. They're low in fat. They contain vitamin B6. They're high in potassium. They have magnesium, iron, and calcium. They're what we call a slow release food. So they're perfect to reduce blood sugar. This is a good food for diabetics. It's good for blood pressure. It improves cholesterol levels, and it maintains a healthy gut. So we want to eat lots of beans, whether they're in their fresh or dried stage, for our health and wellness. And this is a little bean called a tepary. Some of you may not be familiar with this. It's actually an Akmil Otam and Tohono Otam bean. That's its origin. It's also called bavi. It is available on the internet, and also I've been putting it on the Red Mesa cuisine website for people to be able to buy. It's drought tolerant. It grows perfect in a dry environment. So if you don't have access to water in your raised beds, and it's 23 to 30% higher in protein than any other bean that we know of. So it's a perfect food to help keep that blood sugar balanced and regulated. Squash, all of us, I think, love squash. It is considered a superfood. It's high in fiber, loaded with antioxidants, rich in manganese, and manganese boosts bone strength, and it helps the body's ability to process fats and carbohydrates. It's high in vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin B6, folate, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium. And of all the squashes, the butternut squash is the healthiest. So that is a winter squash. And here is a beautiful poster of both summer and winter squash. And so winter squash means you do not eat the outside. Summer squash means you do eat the outside. So many native tribes only ate certain squash in the summer when it was grown in the gardens, and we still do that. So those would be all the squashes on the top of that poster. And then when the squashes were left in the field and developed an outer shell, those were winter squashes. And some winter squashes can winter over for months. You can think of some of us have food houses, or what might be referred to as a root cellar or an underground dwelling, where you can store those foods as long as they don't freeze, and they last for months. So chilies again, very important. Different tribes use them differently, but chilies have medicinal qualities. One green chili has the equivalent of vitamin C of 6 oranges. Antifungal, antibacterial, really good for the gut, and then topically for arthritis, and they release endorphins. So actually here in New Mexico, our state question is red or green. And really what we're asking everyone is, do you want red chili or green chili? That's how important chili is. But chilies add flavor and vitamins and nutrients. They're not only beautiful, some are very hot. We can see a habanero or a yellow hot or a jalapeno or a chili de árbol. So all of these chilies, whether we use them in their hot form or more mild, have these medicinal qualities. And so what's interesting about releasing an endorphin is as the body defends itself against the heat of the chilies, it releases endorphins. And this is a natural body painkiller. So it leaves you with sort of a little bit of a high and it boosts immune response. And so it's very important to incorporate into a native diet. Tomatoes also, and I know on the East Coast, I think the most delicious tomatoes I've ever had in my life have been from that amazing soil that we see not only in the Southeast, but the Northeast. So tomatoes have vitamin A and vitamin C, antioxidants. Lycopene is one of the major ones, and it's a great source of potassium, folate, and vitamin K. So tomatoes, very, very important. Potatoes also, and there's, lots of confusion about potatoes. A lot of people think that they're just starchy and full of carbohydrates, but potatoes go back 7,000 to 10,000 years. So they're right there with corn. And the first cultivated and domesticated potato was from the Inca, and the Inca would be in areas of what is now Bolivia and Peru. So let's take a look at some of these nutrients. They do have carbohydrates, but these are nutrient-dense, complex carbohydrates. They have lots of protein, so 3 grams of protein, lots of fiber, 2 grams of fiber, some calories. They have potassium. If you leave the skin on, so everybody thinks bananas, but potatoes are right up there with getting potassium, and vitamin C, 30% of your daily value. And of course, the most nutritious of all the potatoes is the sweet potato, which definitely a big food in the Southeast. Sweet potatoes, here again, you can actually see those nutrition facts. So 1 medium sweet potato, 0 fat, a little bit of sodium, some carbohydrates, 4 grams of fiber, vitamin C, vitamin A, calcium, and iron. And look what they do. They improve your digestion. They promote healthy weight gain. They treat inflammation. They boost your immune. They relieve asthma. They can treat bronchitis, reduce arthritis pain, treat stomach ulcers. They prevent dehydration, and they control diabetes. So you want to learn how to cook sweet potatoes, add them into your soups or your stews. Unfortunately, I don't think sweet potato fries count because they've been fried, usually in lard or grease. So we want to try and eat those sweet potatoes baked or boiled or added nutritionally into our soups or stews. Vanilla, also highly valued for its flavor, indigenous to the Americas. What amazes me is, how did the ancestors know how to harvest this little pod from an orchid? And how did they know that it would be paired, we call it, with its sweet sister, cacao? And cacao, of course, the bean, vanilla, and cacao, we call the sweet sisters. These were always paired together. Most cacao pods are dried and roasted. Here you can see the beans. You can see a fresh cacao pod. The darker the chocolate, the healthier it is. So chocolate is rich in fiber, iron, magnesium, copper, manganese, as well as other minerals. And just like the chili, it too releases endorphins. So if we deconstruct all of these ingredients, none of these existed in Europe before 1492 and before the facilitation of Columbus bringing these foods back to the old world. So the Italians did not have the tomato. The Irish didn't have the potato. A very popular and British dish called fish and chips. They didn't have chips. Russians didn't have the potato. No vodka from the potato. No chilies in any Asian cuisine anywhere in the world, including Asian and East Indian cuisine, and the French and the Swiss, and in Belgium, they did not have vanilla or chocolate. So these foods that are inherently native changed the world. Wild foods also very, very, very important. Let's take a look. The ramp, which some of you, maybe all of you know, is also called a wild leek or a wild onion. It is native to the eastern North American mountains, and it can be found growing in rich, moist, deciduous forests and on the bottoms of these forests. And here you can see what the ramps look like. Both the leaves and the root can be eaten. So a very important wild food for all of you in the East, as well as some of the plains tribes. The wild strawberry, much smaller than what we now know as a commercial strawberry. It's a pioneer plant, and it loves to thrive where trees and other vegetations have been cleared or burned. And this idea of cleared or burned environment was very prevalent on the East Coast before widespread European settlement, which sort of decimated this. But we do still have the wild strawberry, again, rich in vitamins, very nutritious, very sweet, but much smaller than the commercial. Wild mushrooms, and these are some of the edible mushrooms in North Carolina. There are others, but these are some of the most common. The chanterelle, chicken of the woods, lacatarius, lion's made, and bear's head, maitake, morels, oyster, and reishi. And I have a picture here of oyster, morels, chanterelle, lacatarius, and on the left there, chicken of the woods. And mushrooms, of course, we know very, very, very healthy, and they're really, really good in boosting the immune system. The black walnut, also indigenous to all of you in the East, likes those lower slopes throughout North Carolina. One tree can grow 50 to 90 feet. It can be 3 to 6 feet in diameter when mature, but it does take about 20 years for that tree to produce nuts. And I looked up the nutritional value. And so 1 cup has about 523 calories, good saturated fat. These are the good fats, 5 grams of fiber, lots of protein, 12 grams, and then some calcium. So the black walnut, very, very important to everybody in North Carolina and other places it grows. It does also grow out in this area as well. Acorns, there are over 400 species of oak trees in the world. 60 of them are in North Carolina. These have North America. Many are in North Carolina, specifically what we call the red oak and the white oak. Acorns have always been harvested by Native people. Many acorns, there are a couple of species that don't require leaching, but they do require leaching to be edible. And so this is an indigenous process that we may need to revitalize or reinvigorate if we don't understand how to do that. The pecan, 1/2 cup, provides 691 calories, lots of fiber, lots of protein, lots of minerals and vitamins. But the pecan is not truly a nut, actually. The pecan is actually a fruit. Um, and it's the fruit of the hickory. It's surrounded with a pit and a husk, and also an indigenous nut. The pecan, actually, the word means a nut that the crows could break, and it was, in fact, the crows that helped it migrate westward. And for those of you that don't know, the pecan here in the state of New Mexico is now our #1 nut crop, uh, in the billions of dollars. It's primarily grown in the southern part of our state, but very, very important. Even though it didn't originate here, it did migrate. And again, one of these trees can live for over 300 years. So very important. The pine nut, or the pinon, half a cup, 673 calories. So this little nut out uh, um, more calories than both the black walnut and the pecan. Good fats, again, very important. And there are about 20 different species that produce seeds or nuts that are fit for harvesting. The chokecherry, this is very, very important in my tribe. And actually what I did was I planted what's called an edible landscape. So I actually took little runners and I put them on the north side of my house in my front yard. So instead of grass or bushes, I have everything in my yard that's edible. It has a purpose. And this year, actually in 2020, we usually harvest in July or August. We harvested almost 30 pounds of chokecherries just from the bushes in my yard. So I want all of you also to think about what is in your yard and what could you plant that's wild as part of what we would call an edible landscape, in addition to our cultivated gardens and plants. So all wild teas. This is again a picture of Walter's daughter, Calandra, but many indigenous teas and herbs. And so I want all of you to think about what may be in your area, how would you harvest it, and what medicinal effects do those plants have. Branch lettuce, this is definitely something indigenous to all of you. And it's actually not a lettuce, even though it's known as branch or brook lettuce. It is a native plant to the Great Smoky Mountains, and it grows in many other parts of the southeastern United States. It can be wilted, it can be used fresh. One of the things that you want to keep in mind is we want to make sure that the water supply, because it likes to grow near water, is unpolluted or natural when we harvest. And we want to also take into consideration that this lettuce has lots of nutrients, including fiber and protein, potassium, niacin, folate, calcium, iron, zinc, vitamin A, and vitamin C. So very, very important. And this is actually considered a weed. So I want to encourage you, if you see it growing in your driveway or in between a disrupted area, sometimes it grows in between our gardens when we have gardens. And we're going to see more about gardens in the next part 2 of this. But this little weed, all right, so we don't want to spray it with poison, is higher in omega-3 fatty acids than salmon, vitamin A, vitamin C. Again, it can be eaten raw, like a spinach. It can be cooked. It can be stored. It contains lots of minerals and a very important part. So it's called purslane in English. The Spanish called it verdolaga. Always make sure that you know exactly that it is in fact the right plant that you're harvesting, but very important. We're going to take a look at first contact. So those are just some of wild and cultivated foods in our pre-contact native diet. So what was introduced and what impacted us? Well, Europeans brought sheep and pork and beef and chicken and eggs and dairy. Don't forget, we did cultivate plants, but we didn't domesticate animals. In some parts of the United States, we do see the domestication of the dog with the Plains tribes. but that would have been domesticated for transportation. And so we didn't have byproducts. Whether or not our ancestors tried to milk a lactating deer or an elk or a bison, I don't know. And I couldn't find any information on that. So we had no dairy. And so once those domesticated animals came in, their byproducts, big and profound, apples, peaches, apricots, cherries, watermelon, cabbage, wheat was introduced, wine, grapes, and others. So some of these foods very healthy, and some are woven into the fabric of who we are and our native communities. But they do come from that first contact period. And so here you can see pictures of figs and cherries and apples, wheat, and then some of the wool from the sheep for weaving, wine grapes. And so these now can be side by side in our native communities. And so these are some of the heirloom foods that were introduced to all of our regions. Then we look at the third period, which is the government issue. This is the most historically traumatic. This is the most painful, and this is the most detrimental, to be honest. Many Native people forced relocation onto reservations. Here we see, let's just go back for a sec. Native communities lost their agricultural and hunting. The US government issued commodity foods. Some of the foods were lard, flour, coffee, sugar, and then canned meats such as Spam. Today, it might include part of that commodity or a government issue program. Sometimes it's called FDPIR, dried fruits, canned soups, pasta. Some of these foods, okay to eat, but what happened was, especially during like the Trail of Tears, which was the relocation of tribes on the East Coast, and over 100,000 between 1830 and 1860. And then the Long Walk, which is also called the Trail of Tears for the Navajo, between 1863 and 1866. And so we see, again, forced relocation. My tribe also forced from our ancestral homelands to Oklahoma, although I couldn't really find many photos of that. But today we have 574 federally recognized tribes, and almost every tribe, as well as some state. There are some state recognized tribes that also know this. We all know how to make fry bread, and we all know how to make an Indian taco. So this would be called a pan-Indian dish, where almost every tribe, so the government did succeed, knows how to make this. And there it is, what I would call the infamous Indian taco on a piece of fried bread. And what happened was we started to eat these foods on a regular basis. They're fine if they're eaten sporadically. I actually only eat fry bread once a year now, but this is where some of these health disparities originate and have accumulated over time. So within the last 150 to 200 years, depending on your tribe and your tribal region, foods that were forced and introduced and distributed in the form of maybe rations during this historical traumatic period, and health and wellness has been dramatically and drastically changed. So when we think about this, what we want to do is understand the past, but we want to move forward and focus on the future. Food sovereignty actually is a really important, and it's odd because it is a non-native term. Many of us don't have a term for this in our indigenous language, but food sovereignty basically means the right to sufficient, healthy, culturally appropriate food. The actual definition states that the people who produce, distribute, and consume food should control the mechanisms and policies of food production and distribution rather than the corporations or market institutions that have come to dominate our global food system, right? So we can think about all those large chains and stores and agro companies. So we, as Native people, have the right to our own culturally appropriate food. And that's what we're starting to see, this return, this revitalization. There are some great examples you're going to see in the next PowerPoint on some wonderful garden projects in North Carolina with Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, as well as some other communities and their success stories. So our ceremonies have always honored and given gratitude to everything we hunt and harvest. So this actually is a form of food sovereignty. So here we see the buffalo dance here in the Southwest, many of our tribes reintroducing the bison or the buffalo. And so what we know is the health of the land and the health of the people are woven together, very important. Here we see green corn ceremony is performed when the new crop is ripe and enough to eat, and new corn not to be eaten until that ceremony takes place. So food sovereignty is a form of food justice, food security, environmental justice. It is dependent on our indigenous knowledge, and this indigenous knowledge is called TEK. And our communities, all of our Native communities, can produce and grow and harvest and buy foods, right, from other Native vendors and growers. So TEK is just the knowledge that surrounds the area that we live. It perpetuates the wisdom of the ancestors that is handed down through generations, through our songs, our stories, and our beliefs. And this is a part of our mental and spiritual wellness. So this is a really good example. So cosmology just means the way we look at the world, how we look at the world. And so our ancestors took facts, they managed, right, all of our forests and our lands, managed, never over harvested. They looked at the past and the current uses of our food. We had ethics and values. So each community made offerings, respected the plants, maybe talked to the plants, maybe sung to the plants, had a relationship. We never took everything, right? Never harvested everything. And then that is our culture, our identity. That is who we are as people, as Native people. So what do we need to hold on and reclaim these traditional foods for health and wellness? We need land, right? And that land has to be clean and unpolluted. Many tribes are revitalizing their ancestral lands, reclaiming, maybe even rebuying back those ancestral lands. We need knowledge, and we need our elders, and we need the wisdom of the elders. So we've got to ask questions. We've got to listen to them. And we need the ability and the right. What if some of our ancestral foods are now in a park where we can't go harvest them, or in a private land? So again, how do we have access to those? And then we need education, all ages, all kids on these foods. So how do we do this? Well, there's a movement, and this movement is called the Native American Foods Movement. All of us have this in our own communities, and all of us and many health educators, many of our elders, our traditional tribal members are working in this. So they're working to have land restoration and access for our community members. Seeds, we want to save those seeds. We want to learn traditional farming and wild food gathering. So we want to have education, maybe classes surrounding that, cooking and nutrition. What I found is because we had that boarding school era, we had that government issue. Maybe you have someone in your family lineage that went to boarding school or ripped away or didn't learn their traditional foods. And so we need to understand that and relearn that. And that's okay if you don't have that knowledge, to work on reclaiming that. And so what does that do? It revitalizes everything associated, the cultural, the spiritual, and the physical connections between the environment and our communities, right? For health and wellness. And so we want to have gardens, whether it's a raised bed. Some of you could just start maybe by growing a little herb inside your house during the winter. And then we could do raised beds, or we could have gardens and community gardens. And I wanted to share this, which is from one of my students. This is Kelly Tungovia, in May of 2020. So we started out hands-on, and then we went virtual because of COVID. And she actually did her final paper on the foods the Hopi uses, she's Hopi, of blue and white corn. And I think this is great because we can teach our students and have our students work on harvesting, researching on foods in our own communities. And so Kelly talked about a ceremony where maidens grind corn, maidens learn the traditional place in their family, maybe what does it mean to be a Hopi woman, and the ceremonies of grinding. And so here is a very important food to her people called piki. It uses ash and corn. It's made on a stone. So as part of her research, she showed pictures of family members as well as herself using this and doing this. So in your own community, maybe some of the students that we work with, we could encourage them to research some of our indigenous foods for health and wellness, and start to bring back and get excitement surrounding these foods. And then here is a traditional hummus with the piki. This is the bread that can be eaten every day. And so again, we can bring a very ancestral food into our contemporary kitchens for health and wellness. The other thing that we can do is start to learn who in our community is growing foods. Maybe they sell at a farmer's market. Maybe they're harvesting the ramp or the wild onion or the lettuce. Can we buy from them, or can we trade from them, which many people traditionally did? And that way we keep alive these traditions and make sure that the knowledge surrounding these traditions are used for health and wellness. And so this is our new Native American cuisine. This is foods that maybe bring in the first three components of those periods. They may be fused. And so these are foods we can reclaim for our health and wellness. These are foods that can be used as medicine. These are and this is what's so fascinating, each community gets to define what foods are important to them, what foods do they want to include in their diet to fit their own community's needs, that is healthy for their community members. And so here are some examples of some modern foods based on tradition, whether it's beans with harvested little greens, or tamales or dumplings, stuffed chilies, squash, corn soup. Here is a sunflower cake served with an herb jelly. I don't know if you knew this, but guacamole and salsa are native foods. They're just a native food from the South. Here's a squash fry, or a sauteed squash with sunflower seeds, something that we call calabacitas. We can do that dark chocolate with pine nuts, and very important. So these are really important foods. And then here is a picture of Chef Walter Whitewater, pictured here with Chef Bertina. And so we want to make sure that the chefs, maybe the older generation. I'm what's called an elder in training. I'm not quite an elder, but I'm definitely getting up there and getting into that mentor stage. And so what foods do you want to bring back? I'm going to show you an example of a food that we helped the communities to the south of us bring back. This is a cactus pad. It's from the Nepal cactus. And a lot of the knowledge surrounding that cactus was lost. And so Walter and I worked with community members on teaching how to grill it, how to clean it, and then how to use it and make it into a salad. So again, very important. What foods in your area do we need to revitalize and bring back for health and wellness? And I don't know how many of you know this, but here is a picture of a corn soup that we do. It's actually going to be one of the soups I'm going to teach all of you how to make in part 3. And we use a paint, which is a spiral design and then 4 dots. The spiral design is found in many of our petroglyphs and ancestral drawings or gardens. It represents indigenous knowledge. But those 4 dots, so if you think about it, that knowledge starts at the beginning of time and it spirals outward. And then the 4 dots represent 4 generations: child, adolescent, middle-aged, and elder. And it only takes 1 generation for that spiral to be broken. So whether it's a song or a story or a language or a tradition or our important indigenous knowledge surrounding food, we have to keep this alive. And it's up to all of us, all of our community members, to make sure. If I didn't learn from my mom, how can I pass it on to my kids and their kids? And so again, very important. And so how do we do this? Well, we do this with partnerships. And on that very first slide, you saw all the partners that are involved in this presentation that are concerned for your health and wellness and working in your community to revitalize this. So we do need nonprofits and organizations and indigenous organizations and non-indigenous organizations all to come together. But the one thing we want to remember is that the indigenous agenda needs to be the priority here. We need to focus on things that are important in our communities. And this has to be both short and long term. You can't just do one thing and then walk away. This is forever. And these relationships and these partnerships are really something that lasts long term. So here are a couple of pictures of some chefs. This is Walter Whitewater and Nephi Craig and Loretta Barrett Oden, different tribes all working together on plating contemporary dishes, using some of the symbolism in our own ancestral past. This is corn 3 ways. So this chef, Bertina Cadman, has a corn soup, she has a corn mush, and a corn salad. And so again, using those ancestral foods in a very contemporary way. This is Letitia Wilson, and she is using an ancestral stirring stick in a very contemporary modern kitchen. So absolutely the old and the new can come together in our kitchen and work hand in hand. We don't have to let go of one to have the other. So the old and the new can work in tandem and together. Here is a corn mush 3 ways, a blue corn mush, a toasted white corn mush, and a corn mush with sumac, which is a little berry from the 3-leaf sumac that grows all over the United States. And so again, making these ancestral foods. And actually, Freddie Bitsui, this is an old photo of him, he is now the executive chef of the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. So we want to foster relationships with our native chefs because we just don't know where they're going to end up and the impact that they're going to have, not only on our community, but educating people all over the United States and all over the world. And so what we need to do is we need to have culinary professionals where the Native American agenda takes priority, and we educate everyone, right? Everybody needs to be educated on the importance of Native American cuisine and Native foodways. So, you know, my mom always said there was a medicine wheel, and on that medicine wheel were 4 colors. Those are the 4 colors of corn. Those are the 4 peoples on the earth, and all the peoples are part of the circle, and all the people need to come together and understand what Native American cuisine is, our native foodways, and perhaps play a role in partnering with us to revitalize those foods in our native communities for health and wellness. And so what happens when we do this? We actually shift. We have a new paradigm. We have a new outcome. So we activate our Indigenous knowledge. We learn that Indigenous knowledge from our ancestors. We understand interactions with the land and our culture that inform our practice, how we live. We create and embed Indigenous cultural links into standards of our Indigenous cuisine, which also is recovering social values through our Indigenous food, healthy people, healthy land, right? So we transition from only a Western or a Euro culinary methodology to one that reclaims native traditional values for our food practice, and our food presentation. We use teaching methods and strategies that include the history. We want to tell the history. A lot of that history that was taught when I went to school wasn't told. And if it was told, it wasn't told accurately. So we want to rewrite this. We want Native scholars, Native community members to tell these stories. We want to learn how to plant and have gardens, wild food harvesting, food as medicine, how to prepare some of these foods for health and wellness in our native communities. We want to strengthen our partnerships with local, tribal, state, and federal programs that support our Indigenous food systems for health and wellness. And we want to identify resources that assure accessibility to safe, fresh, and healthy foods. And you know, my students at IAI always say, if I live across the street from a supermarket like Whole Foods, but I can't afford to shop there, is that access? And the answer to that is no. And so how do we have access to affordable, healthy foods to our people in our native communities? And so I'm going to begin to wrap this up by saying, you know, some of us grew up off reservation. Some of us grew up on reservation. Some of us grew up in urban areas or rural areas. And these 2 girls, so Calandra grew up on the reservation, Tidra grew up urban. It doesn't matter where you grew up. You can still learn the ancestral traditional foods and the knowledge of our ancestors that can be passed on so that we can pass that on to the next generation and our own generation, understanding that, and we can sort of focus on a solution-orientated approach to health and wellness, and move out of that historical trauma from the past. And this is a quote that Tidra made, and I thought that I would share this with all of you. And so Tidra says, you know, when I'm around native foods, it always reminds me of my grandma's house, because that's what I got to eat when I would go back home. Now I'm trying to learn the importance of making the same food for myself and keeping these native foods alive in my own life. And so I think the wish and the thought is that all of us can learn some of our native foods and we can keep them alive and we can use them for health and wellness. And whether that means revitalizing or recovering or any of the re-indigenizing, another great term for health and wellness. We just want to make sure that we do that in our Native communities, and we encourage our youth and all of our community members to learn as much as they can. So this is my contact information, and you're welcome to and indigenous knowledge. Um, and so we are here for you and available for you. So reach out at any time to ask us questions or let us be of service to you. We want all of our Native communities to be healthy. We want all of our community members to be well, and we want to be able to pass on important cultural information to generations to come, many generations to come in the future. So thank you so much for listening and looking at some pictures. Elaine, I'm going to turn it over to you. Maybe there's some questions in the chat box that we can answer.
Yes, great program, Lois. I learned a lot. I hope everyone did. I just want to say thank you for walking us through, like down a path through those 3 periods and even into the modern day and the issues that we need to pay attention to today. And what foods do EBCI members want to restore? It's a great conversation. And that one is on February 24th at 5:30 p.m. So it's an evening program. Please, please, please share the link to that with your contacts because obviously, as you saw today, there's so much important information here. So I just want to say thank you from all the people who've been involved in putting this together. And I couldn't have done it without everyone. And it's wonderful.
And don't forget to tune in for the part 2, part 3, part 4, and part 5. You're going to learn a lot and we're going to make it lots of fun. So thank you so much to Elaine and everyone that worked with us on this. And we'll hope to see you guys at the next presentation.